Hello and welcome to the smartest moron. Well, I think it's about time we stop marathoning a series, so let's look at some games we never got. First up on the list is a Squaresoft game, before their merger with Square Enix and shoving Final Fantasy anything down our throats. I chose this one in particular since apparently this received a trademark in the USA and in other places, hinting that Square may have plans for it in the future. At the time of this video's creation, nothing has been done, and I doubt anything will happen. I mean, Parasite Eve was teased and had its trademark registered, and nothing came of it. Then again, I look at the Mana series, and maybe I should just shut up. The translation for Live Alive was done by the group Aeon Genesis, who apparently finished it well over a decade ago. I don't really have much history beyond that though, apart from hearing how great and weird this game was. At first, I expected something similar to Earthbound, a game I feel is weird for the sake of being weird and couldn't really get into. Yeah, sorry about the Earthbound fans. Well, in some cases that is kinda true, especially given this comedic duo that constantly appear in every single chapter, Live Alive is actually a solid experience I had a lot of fun with. Barring some issues. For this review though, we are doing things differently, combining the gameplay and story segments since there are so many paths and they are all super short, around 3 hours at max, 1 or 2 not even lasting an hour. Maybe more if you spend time grinding and looking for extra bosses. Plus a lot of these paths play differently too, so it would help if I just went over both at the same time. Also, I want to show off my physical copy. Due to my low budget laptop, I can't really do much beyond editing. Sure, I can play some games, but emulations are a major pain in the ass, not helped with Nintendo cracking down hard on them in recent years. Fortunately, some shops sell physical copies, and in my case, Immortal Gems is the one I buy my games from. I have quite a few, and they gave me permission to promote them. In fact, you can use the code in the description down below for 5% off your order. So let's get started with this review of Live Alive for the Super Nintendo. My god, I can't believe I have this system again. Also, I had to get this one because the Retron 5 is a picky bastard. For these games, I recommend just buying a Super Nintendo. There are 7 story choices you can choose from, each one representing a different era and genre, some of which may feel a bit odd if you are used to only fantasy stuff. The basic gameplay involves characters involved on a grid where they can move and attack foes, with techniques taking up a certain number of spaces. Learning what your moves do requires some experimentation, as there is barely any explanation as to what they can do. Some can inflict status effects like poison from these parts, or they can leap behind panels to damage foes, and yourself if you aren't careful. Some moves can even lower your stats to boot, so you have to wonder if the sacrifice is worth it. Surprisingly, enemies are not set as random encounters. In most of the chapters, you can see where they are coming from and avoid them if need be. You can even run away if you don't mean to engage them, or if they are simply too strong. I did that for the caveman chapter whenever the odds were against me, and was able to fight something more manageable. Your HP also recovers after each fight, and with no MP bar to worry about, your attacks can be used recklessly, though some have a charge time to them, and you could be left vulnerable. And the last thing you need is a super strong enemy wailing on someone as they prepare an attack, or possibly even cancel it. There are no shops either. Sometimes you have to earn items through fighting, or through other means in some chapters. This makes healing items much more valuable. If you are worried about being knocked out, you only need a healing item or skill, and they will get right back up. However, they can also permanently be taken out of that specific fight if they are hit just once when all their HP is gone. Aside from that, each chapter has their own gimmicks, and they'll go in the order of how I did things. Keep in mind, it's totally possible for you to not follow what I did. The first story I dove into was the Caveman, whose default name was Pogo, and who also comes with a gorilla sidekick named Gory. Since these are primitive times, there is hardly any dialogue. Action is usually done to keep the story going, and mostly for comedy. Though the game does start out with a woman named Belle escaping the clutches of a bunch of other cavemen, including this one dude named Zaki, who loves to flip his hair and has a lizard as a codpiece. I'm not kidding, by the way. Pogo is easily infatuated with the pretty woman, so he ends up helping and feeding Belle, even giving her items that make her... Yeah, that happens. There's a surprising amount of sexual humor in this game, like a female gorilla shaking her boobs and other stuff. Starting to see why we didn't get this, as I can hear the cries of upset parents in the alternate timeline. Anyway, it's up to Pogo and Gory to help protect Belle after being cast out of the village since, well, she was stealing food, along with some other matters. Pogo though doesn't let it bother him too much, clearly wanting more kisses from Belle. As for the unique gameplay shtick, this one relies on sniffing out foes using the Y button, though it is very likely you'll end up running into a foe even if you didn't mean to. The other thing involves gathering items from certain areas or defeating foes. You trade the items to a lone caveman in order to get better gear to use immediately. Some of this stuff can be very important since you're going to lose all your items at the end of each chapter, so you're going to want the best equipment on your main character. Really, the problem I had with this chapter was pacing of the encounters, since you lose Belle at some point, and if she isn't leveled up enough, then in the final battle, she becomes more of a liability, as there is no chance to make her stronger. Plus, one segment really got on my nerves. See, you'll be chased by cavemen and gotta get through a door. Since the enemies constantly respawn, you have to try and not kill the cavemen, otherwise the way will constantly be blocked as you make your way to the door, even if you are just one space away from reaching the exit, so you have to maneuver your way to reach it. This would be fine, encouraging you to use your brain to solve the puzzle and sounds interesting, but it's annoying to constantly be forced into a battle, especially since Gory in your party adds yet another character to be hit for in a random fight. Now, to be fair, you can flee fights and force your way to the exit, but that's just the basic strategy. Combine it with the tight hallway, and this wasn't fun. However, I still found the chapter very enjoyable and a good introduction to the gameplay, especially since you have a party to work with. Up next is the Kung Fu chapter, starring a character who strangely never has his name said, so I will refer to him as the Master. Just try not to think of the Master in Buffy the Vampire Slayer. Old age is catching up with him fast, so you must find a pupil to pass on his arts before he dies. He manages to round up 3 teenagers with attitude: Lee Kugo, a thief who fails to steal from the Master and specializes in speed; Sammo Haka, a man ashamed of his weight yet has an appetite rivaling a Saiyan and specializes in being a tank; and finally, Yuan Yu, a kid who gets in trouble with the Tiger King gang and wants to train to increase his bravery. His stats are initially the weakest, but they can rapidly grow, though he is kind of a glass cannon. Though feel free to choose who you want. I personally went with Lee since she's the only female main character in this game. I'll explain later as we get into spoilers. As for the gameplay, you have training sessions where you can have 4 matches with the student of your choice. Just focus on one of them and use various techniques to beat up your students, and as they level up, they will learn those moves. They can even gain a stat bonus to make them even more powerful. There is sadly not really any extra stuff to do in this chapter, though the story itself did dig into my heartstrings, though, again, spoilers. Next up is the Ninja, where you control a man named Oboro who serves under his master, and is tasked with recovering one of their allies in the enemy castle. His personality isn't shown too much, but you do get quite a few choices on how to handle the level. For instance, Oboro's special ability is to hide away from enemies, which is useful against powerful foes you want to avoid. The fact you can run away from most battles helps a lot. If you manage to do a no-kill run, you do get a very powerful sword, one that would normally require killing a secret boss. Since that task was quite frustrating and this level can get quite complicated, I ended up killing almost everyone I saw. If I didn't have a guide, I would have missed out on a few things, such as being able to get a robot sidekick, who can die very easily if you, say, fall into a trap and it smashes into pieces. Yeah, I'm so glad I had saved before this happened. And really, that robot is only useful for the extra bosses. And for those worried about being unable to level up, you can technically fight certain enemies to get stronger, and they won't count to the kill count. I guess ghosts and demons aren't people too. There is also a bell that sounds off in the area from time to time, which indicates when a certain password changes. Though a nice detail to watch out for, it outstayed its welcome once you run out of characters who require one. The runtime of this chapter can also grow longer thanks to the extra bosses, though one is really damn obscure to get to. The Cowboy is next, where you take control of a man named Sundown Kid, who wanders the Wild West with a bounty on his head. A bounty hunter named Mad Dog hunts him down, though Sundown has little issue knocking him down a peg or two without resorting to killing him. Though as Sundown travels into a city for a drink, he is forced to deal with a gang of ruffians, and then protect the town from their boss, Dio. I swear I have more jokes beyond just Dio from JoJo's. But yeah, this chapter is really short, though the difficulty depends on how well you gather some items and form traps. You have a limited time to get the necessary materials so you don't have to fight so many enemies, as they will be caught in the traps. Beyond the traps, there's nothing really complex about this chapter. Even Dio himself fails to impress. Well, beyond one spoiler, though it ends up more baffling than anything else. Another short chapter involves the wrestler Masuro, who wants to learn many different styles of martial arts and fights against many different people. So, less wrestling and more Street Fighter then. I'm not kidding, with the way these menus and beating up bases show up along with the dialogue, it's very reminiscent of the fighting game. There's not a whole lot to Masuro's character beyond the fact he wants to be strong, yet he also doesn't like to kill people. As for the gameplay, it's pure action, as you choose from 6 enemies and must defeat them. However, much like the Kung Fu chapter, you need to learn the techniques, though this time for yourself as opposed to training someone else. Fortunately, it seems all you need to do is just be hit by the move once, though expect a hard fight in some cases, as some people can damage you severely, dodge your attacks with ease, or keep biting you as if trying to mimic Mike Tyson. Also, I don't know who everyone is meant to parody. At the very least, I know this guy looks a hell of a lot like Hulk Hogan. Since there are no healing items, you only have a battle cry to use for healing, which can end up hurting you since it requires a charge to use it, letting the enemy get some free hits in. You have to be very careful about range and learn how to best use these techniques while learning them. I feel this is the hardest chapter for these reasons, especially since you can't grind. Or at the very least, it's the most frustrating in terms of gameplay, next to the ninja. The mecha one is much more meatier, similar to the caveman story, with characters being established and having some surprisingly neat plot twists. However, it's also a parody of stuff related to Sentai, even having lyrics to a song. Since this is the Super Nintendo era, obviously there are no vocals. Not that it stopped bands or anything, as someone did translate the lyrics and then sing it, sparing me the effort. You can find the link up top in the card, unless YouTube decides to take those away. You play as Akira, a young man who lost his father to a group known as the Crusaders. Those same people antagonize him as he tries to look after an orphanage, and he usually has to be saved by another man named Matsu. And yes, the motorcycle animation here does look kinda silly given how huge it is. As to why he's being hunted, it's likely related to his psychic powers, as he can read people's minds and later gains elemental attacks as he levels up. Akira's journey revolves around protecting the orphanage and his sister, as well as helping the scientist named Toei in creating his super robot. Really, the only problem I had with the plot was following a set of events to activate the mecha, since it involves going up and down these long ass stairs, and screwing up repeats the process. As for the gameplay, while Akira can fend for himself, he does need some help, as some enemies can turn him into stone instantly, which is basically an instant game over if you're alone. Your run command now allows you to teleport out of battle, taking you to the orphanage immediately, and in the bathroom for some reason. Actually, also expect some bathroom humor in this chapter, for I had to mind read the professor to progress, and if I had to endure it, so do you. Another very important gameplay feature is a robot you later gain. Unlike the others, he can't level up, but as you gather robot parts, you can boost up its health. The reason this is important is because another character functions like this. In order to get better gear this time, certain items need to be brought to Toei to make them better, though the catch is there's a chance of failure sometimes, making the process very annoying. Although, thankfully you can't lose that item, though some items can potentially turn into something inferior. One of the coolest set of items is making accessories for the robot, as they can expand his arsenal and he can hit super hard. I recommend equipping them on Akira near the end too, for they can help your next party member, who happens to be the next story route. The last of the original 7 we will cover is the sci-fi one, starring a robot named Cube. Created by a man named Kato, both he and Cube are on a spaceship, transporting a dangerous beast known as a behemoth. No, not that one. Though, then again, we could just call this a space behemoth, like Space Godzilla is to regular Godzilla. I don't know. Anyway, they gotta take the thing back to Earth, but things start to go badly, and describing any more would ruin the surprise. If you like films such as Alien, you may enjoy this one. This is the tale that engaged me the most and made the sci-fi chapter one of my favorites of the original 7. As for the gameplay, there is surprisingly little combat. If the behemoth finds you, it's instant game over. Hell, there are a few ways poor Cube can die outside of fighting, which meant I died the most in this chapter. So gameplay revolves around avoiding the monster and trying to navigate the ship and talk to people to progress the story, and sometimes cheering them up with bitter coffee. You have an optional combat side game, which really doesn't give you anything, and the final fight, which is a giant spoiler I can't show. Fortunately, the boss fight there is surprisingly easy. Perhaps the easiest in the entire game, albeit very time consuming. You might have already figured this out, but once all 7 are finished, there is even more content. You may have noticed a genre missing, one Squaresoft is known for quite a bit. Yep, the last chapter is Fantasy, starring a knight named Orsted and his friend Strabo. Both are in a tournament for the hand of the princess. Orsted wins, but during their night atop a castle as they proclaim their love for each other, his new wife is stolen by demons. After talking with the king, Orsted decides to save her himself, and surprisingly everyone is chill with you arming yourself to the teeth. The king opens up his vault, civilians give away weapons and other items, and my god, where was this support in all the other fantasy games? During the journey, they team up with the previous heroes, Uranus and Hash, while the latter putting himself in exile. Because of spoilers, I will end it here. As for the gameplay, this is where random battles are put in for some reason, maybe to keep up with the traditions set by Final Fantasy and Dragon Quest at the time. Aside from that, not much gameplay differences between all the other routes, and anything drastic related least to story purposes. Although there is one part where I felt I needed to use a trick to get a ton of healing items since Orsted lacks a healing move, and some of the bosses aren't exactly easy. After that chapter, the characters can all finally come together, pulled into another world and forced to face off against enemies from all different eras. You must first choose a main protagonist for the finale though, as they will be your main throughout the entire game. In order to recruit characters, you need to meet certain requirements, like finding Sundown in certain locations, or fighting up o.dio by examining a sign. You can only have a party of up to 4 and need to return to the area where you recruited the character to get them back. And yes, that means going to every location just to get back Sundown. This chapter made me wish I did more with Pogo, as the extra stuff he gets likely could have helped the other party members early on. Combat from here on out is random and it becomes much more dickish. In fact, this is where the combat system starts showing some problems. For starters, there are times when you can run into incredibly strong foes your party isn't prepared for. Times like these make me thankful that running away always works, unless you do it too much. In that case, a super boss will punish you. He's definitely beatable and you get some really good armor, but you need some really good skills gained at level 16. Not helping are some characters who aren't ready to tackle this chapter. Masaru, for example, despite his chapter being about fighting bosses, is at level 2. Sundown, despite having an attack capable of destroying damn near anyone later on, starts at level 5. Compared to o.dio or Pogo, who have the potential to bring incredible gear and be at a good level, well, why the hell would I choose the former two? Hell, o.dio kicked my ass at first. The balance is really skewed, forcing you to grind in order for you to use your favorites, and really showing how other characters need more to do in their chapters. And then there's the frequency of attacks being interrupted. It can sometimes be very annoying just to get your character to do anything. By the time you move into position, an enemy may use an annoyingly strong move to force you to switch strategies or ruin your chance to attack. And thus, once again, I'm forced to grind so everyone doesn't die just by an enemy pushing someone into a certain position. However, even that is not sufficient for the likes of the final boss, who ends up interrupting me so frequently I had to rely on 1 or 2 attackers at best, and getting lucky with Sundown's attack, especially since the boss can cancel charged moves. So I had to rely on Lee's ultimate attack since it lacks a charge. Healing items were a godsend since they outclassed Cube's healing abilities. Plus, if I heal with Cube, who doesn't even heal me that much, the boss gets another free hit in, resetting the progress. So I had to hope I had enough healing items that could cover a wide range. Fortunately, I had enough, but it was still annoying.
Sounds fair, White.
Oh, you've got to be kidding. That means we each get 1 turn per round, and you get like a gajillion.
I'm glad you understand.
Let's compare this to some of the Shin Megami Tensei games to show how unfair this is. Yes, the enemies there can wail on your party and possibly unfairly kill you, especially on hard mode. But you have the tools to win by using buffs and debuffs, which can help make the enemy vulnerable. I know some people like to say how some bosses are bullcrap, but say using buffs to raise my agility, I can dodge a boss's attacks much easier and get to my turn faster to wail on them. It's still a bit luck-based, like in that one particular boss fight I never ever want to repeat, but I'm able to shift the battle to my favor. Not so much with Live Alive, when any kind of setup can be easily ruined. And if a charged move activates when I want to heal, well, the boss gets yet another turn to wail on me, made worse when the game decides it wants to deal way more damage than what the attack did before for seemingly no reason. My final problem revolves around the stats. I started to notice this when I gained some armor that, while weak, supposedly grants a huge boost to my attack power. I equipped it on Sundown, and nothing changed. It made me wonder what each stat actually does, and I discovered a GameFAQs post describing only certain attacks are affected by these stats. So some may never power up at all no matter how many points you have. It began to make sense as I noticed how hard o.dio hit when his IQ received a massive boost, more than any other stat. This all feels misleading, and how a lack of descriptions really harms the combat system. Not enough to make it unfun, of course, barring certain fights. I don't mind using a guide from time to time, but it's annoying to pull it out just to know how to power up a few attacks and know what they do. However, I really like this game despite the huge difficulty spike in some spots. I do recommend having a guide handy, for the game doesn't always hold your hand, nor always tell you where to go. And some solutions can be hard to find unless you pay very close attention to the environment, especially the Shinobi chapter. Hell, even if you pay attention, you may not know exactly what the hell to do sometimes. The only other real problem I have with this game is that I wish some chapters had some more meat to their story, to get me to care more about some of these characters, or add some more details giving them a better personality, especially during the final chapter. Thankfully, not every character suffers from this. Now onto spoilers as we cover the fantasy side story, and start to understand a common theme between all the other chapters. So, About the fantasy chapter. Things don't go well. There are some hints the chapter will go down a dark path since the beginning with the tournament and comparing the sides of Orsted and Strabo stood in versus how the castle and Demon King stood in the same directions. Despite motivating Hash to retake his sword and bravely charged into battle, he ends up dying, revealed to have some kind of plague or something. It should be noted the reason he was reluctant to even do this seemed to be of how the people were shallow and likely would have villainized him at some point, or forget how much was sacrificed to kill the last Demon King. There's barely any info and used more as setup. Strabo is also trapped in the room, presumed dead, and Uranus and Orsted return in defeat. Just as they try to get some rest, Orsted finds the Demon King in the castle and attacks immediately. Just, one issue with that. Yeah, perhaps the worst thing ever just happened. Knowledge of this quickly spreads, with townspeople believing Orsted killed Hash and Strabo too. He flees as Uranus is arrested, though eventually gets put in the slammer too. You know, with how easily he was subdued and put into a jail cell, why couldn't they just kill him as he was in the cell or something? Snark aside, this is a very good sequence, as Orsted is giving up hope with everyone turning on him. Uranus, despite being tortured during his time there, tries to cheer up the young knight, saying how even if only one person believes in him, that's enough to keep on fighting. After all, there is one hope left: saving the princess. Not only could he clear his name, but the two did love each other. At the very least, it's a possible first step in actually fixing this mess. Due to Uranus being weak from all that torture, he uses the last of his life force to unlock the door, allowing Orsted to continue his mission. He fights his way through the castle and dungeon once more, discovering a hidden room he believes hides the princess, and finds Strabo, alive and well, and able to wield greater power than ever before. He reveals his evil plan, saying how he suddenly knew how to use the power of the Demon King. The one moment of weakness was all he needed, all of his negativity coming up to the surface to tempt him. He was jealous of Orsted, claiming he was so selfish and just took things, like robbing his chances of being with the princess. Orsted has no choice but to strike his friend down. However, the bad news just keeps on coming. Strabo was such an evil little shit. He manipulated the princess by saying how Orsted abandoned her. Devastated by the news, she clung to Strabo. So now with him dead and likely knowing of her dad being dead too, she ends up killing herself to join Strabo. Left with no one else who believes in him, Orsted finally breaks the code of the silent protagonist and announces himself as the new Demon King. Okay, I said Cube had my favorite story. Yeah, no, fantasy wins hands down. Orsted is possibly the most fleshed out character in this game, and his story is one of such tragedy, I can even understand why he became the main villain of the game. The fact that literally everyone in the world hates him, plus the amount of shocking death and revelations, there was no chance in hell he could recover. He truly is alone, acting out in rage, for it's the only thing he has left. Once the chapter is finished, you can now choose a character to become the true main protagonist. This includes Orsted, and initiates a route where he takes control of all the bosses of the main game. You might have noticed how his new name was similar to those foes, and it's possible they are incarnations of him throughout time itself. It's kinda weird how he suddenly has this much power, but I'm gonna assume the Demon Lord has some kind of cheat sheet on how to actually use these abilities. The fights in this chapter are hilariously one-sided, with the chance of losing damn near impossible. You have to actually try to lose, and if you do that, well, Orsted just flat out well, talk about a sore loser. However, that's the point. Winning is empty and means nothing. Orsted is victorious, walking through a dead version of his world, and left to be reminded he is, and forever will be, alone. Until you realize this idiot had the power to screw with the timeline and pull in several heroes into his timeline, so what was stopping him from just going into another timeline or something and starting over? Now don't get me wrong, I still like Orsted as an antagonist, but this bit, I'm not sure there is an answer. Still, it's a minor complaint when everything else has been pretty good. And now for the good ending. You can choose any of the 7 as a main protagonist, the leader of the group. Of the many I had, I ended up going with Lee Kugo from the Kung Fu chapter, though of the others, I likely would have chosen either Akira or Cube since their stories were the most compelling outside of Lee. I chose her for a few reasons. For starters, she's technically the only playable female party member, and even then, she can be replaced by her fellow classmates. If you are looking for a strong female character, this game won't provide any beyond Lee. As I played, I realized she was a good choice to help relate to Orsted. Her chapter had her as a thief in a forest, likely not having any place to go. It's probably why despite her rage at losing to the Master, she ends up joining him anyway. Whatever place he's taking her to is likely better than sleeping in the trees. In fact, when it comes to training personally, she is the most eager to fight the Master, likely wanting to surpass him ASAP. You could also argue some of these things as being part of a rushed story, especially since we get no further background info like flashbacks, but it made me think she enjoyed having some positive company for a change, even before the story's twist. Someone was believing in her. Thought she could be better when she had given up. Gee, I can't think of who that reminds me of. Though at the same time, she tries not to let her guard down too much. One training session ends up harming her body, so her classmates try to help her. Simply being called a girl is enough to make her laugh. Likely a thing of its time, like sexism, but it could also be seen as a way for her team to see her as something beyond just a thief. I should note Lee does have a scar on her cheek, and when combined with her anger, I wouldn't be surprised if she scares people away. Eventually though, a gang the Master pissed off gets their revenge, as they were part of a school of martial artists. The sheer numbers overwhelmed the students once the Master was away. Lee manages to survive, but her friends... There aren't many scenes capable of striking my heart, but the ones like these or with Orsted just freaking devastated. Despite the Master's earlier talk about one shouldn't give in to aggression, he sure as hell does, storming off to take on his own students' killers, leaving Lee behind. Though not before teaching her the secret technique of this martial art. Lee cuts him off, however, and ultimately breaks down, blaming herself for their deaths and wanting to join the Master in seeking revenge. He understands quickly and the two set off, tearing through the school with the utmost of ease, until they have to fight through each of the top students and teachers. The Master is ambushed by a sudden group of assassins and opts to take them on as Lee takes on their boss, able to briefly tap into the power of the martial art. Lee eventually does take down the Bastard in one of the most satisfying beatdowns ever. In fact, screw it, I'm showing it. Though they achieve victory, the Master's old age finally catches up with him, his body too beaten and exhausted from his own battle. As he passes away, he praises Lee's talents as well as her heart, and how it's as warm as the sun now, but more importantly, to never lose sight of it. Again, I have no idea what story similarity I could bring up in this situation. I must look like a big Uranus right now, huh? And as he dies, she finally calls him Master instead of Gramps, even burying him near her fellow classmates. She promises to keep growing stronger, to be even kinder than her Master, and after breaking a boulder, she finally claims the title of Master for herself. I'm sure you guys see it by now, her story was kind of like Orsted, but in reverse, also lacking a betrayal too. While it's hard to call Lee in the beginning as evil, she was willing to beat up an old man for some cash. Not exactly a paragon of virtue. At least a grunt level of villainy. She likely didn't have any faith in herself, so having someone who believed she could be so strong led her to trusting the Master quickly. Or if nothing else, saw it as the best way to get some payback until she began to develop and care for her new home and friends. And the Master's parting words are very similar to Uranus talking to Orsted, of how to never lose faith so long as someone believed in you. The difference is pretty obvious with how Lee is able to rise up, grow as a person, and run a school on her own once the events of the game are over. Orsted, however, gave up with humanity after so much hatred and let the pain control him. Once Orsted is defeated, you have the option to kill him. To get the best ending, you have to refuse and leave. However, Orsted is a sore loser and employs his backup plan. No, not the worldwide destruction thingy. Attack the gang as the incarnations they already defeated. This boss rush, depending on how much you prepared the characters, is super easy. At first, I thought this was just recycling content since scenes are reused, likely one of the reasons, yet it also shows just how much every character has grown. Battles that tested their minds and body now are nothing. They aren't shackled to the past like Orsted is. Lee eventually gives her speech on how the two were similar, since she envied others while at her lowest point, but she recognizes behavior like her thievery and Orsted's murder frenzy is wrong, and how even when someone is at their lowest, they shouldn't give up. Sure, the speech is a bit clunky, but it does fit her character since not a lot of time has passed to help mold her attitude a bit better. Orsted ends up realizing how he did give up, and with his dying breath, warns how anyone can end up like this, and to not follow in his footsteps. Well, that's gonna be easy. I mean, no one else has a cave leading to all things evil. As for how others can relate to him, since I'm not playing this game over and over again, I can make a few guesses. In Sundown's story route, the reason for the bounty is explained. He put it out on himself after failing to protect his home, which was attacked by a gang of outlaws. However, despite wanting to die, he made every moment of his life count to try and stop gangs like the one run by Dio, even earning a reputation to continue doing this. It's why he doesn't kill Mad Dog, unless you choose to finally do so. He doesn't give up and found a reason to keep on going. Akira likely wouldn't hold such a grudge against Orsted since instead Matsu died, and Matsu killed Akira's father. Yet despite learning of it, Akira valued Matsu as a kind of substitute father figure, or more like a big brother. He likely understood the value of life and how people could change, since Matsu had no obligation to switch sides and could have just let them alone to rot in the orphanage. It should be noted Akira was a very little kid when his dad died. Matsu even sacrificed himself to try and save Akira, so it becomes much harder to actually hate him. In fact, Matsu's death is the one thing motivating Akira to kick some ass. The computer AI in the space chapter was apparently corrupted by Orsted, just roll with it, and gave up so damn fast at the slightest bit of conflict, likely feeling the pain of several years of death and betrayal. Yet Cube, who was only born just recently, never gave up, and neither did the humans. Even the gun-toting soldier, the one who hated Cube the most, was one of the best supporters of Cube and became someone who grew to help other machines. Pogo is likely too dumb to understand the more complicated things about Orsted, or why he should even hate him. In fact, in his chapter, he forgave Lizard Crotch and welcomed him into his village. Plus his villagers did forgive Pogo, so it's more likely Pogo would forgive this guy too. It's a tad harder to justify Masuro and Oboro, but I'm sure even they have some reasoning that can relate to Orsted. And for as much as I love these characters, analyzing Orsted by comparing him to Lee made me go from liking this game to outright loving it. Again, despite the combat being really rough in that final fight. Hell, I sacrificed sleep just to get the script done, which I'm sure will show in my totally flawless writing skills that never showed any problems whatsoever. Oh hey Super Robot Wars reviews, but yeah, while teaching a lesson of never giving up is nothing new, the way this game went about it while I played as Lee was fantastic. My only wish is that I wanted more character interactions, development between the cast beyond just the big bad. Maybe we'll get it if Square Enix ever remakes this game, though the chances of that for the moment are still slim. I recommend you play Live Alive as soon as you can, however you can. And this message of hope was something I needed at the moment I played this. At the time of this review, I lack a job, financial and emotional support in places, and depression that constantly tells me nobody wants me around. That's not even touching anything political. Yet no matter what, there is hope even for the hopeless. There's always a way, always a light in the darkness, even for someone at their lowest. I'm the smartest moron, and thank you for watching.